Hi. For this week's Lenten meditation reflection, I thought I'd share with you just, maybe a couple of stories, I guess we might call them. I was looking the other day and I was reading an obituary for Alan MacDonald. Alan MacDonald was an engineer with Morton Thiokol, and Morton Thiokol was the company that produced and designed the rocket launchers that were used in the space shuttle program. Starting the obituary, it said that Alan MacDonald died a couple days ago as a result of brain damage resulting from a fall. And, that's pretty close to what my dad died from about a year ago. So it took me off track there for a little second or two. But as I remember my dad and was sort of like putting the things together with his story, it was, my dad is a person I always looked at and saw as being one of honor and integrity. And much of my sense of what it means to be a person of honor, a person who has integrity, came from him. Anyway, McDonald was one of the engineers, and he was at the Kennedy Space Center to approve or disapprove the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger 30 years ago. Now, leading up to that, which nobody really seems to have, which very few people knew about, was there was a discussion with the engineers of Martin Thiokol and the executives, and the engineers insisted that any temperature below 53 degrees was not safe. And the O-rings which connected the rocket launchers would fail, and it could cause an explosion and loss of life. And the executives were convinced by the data and the argument of the engineers, and they told NASA and that it wasn't safe to launch under 53 degrees. This was a time when NASA was trying to go and really kick up the space shuttle launching program. And the NASA executives in conversation with Morton Thiokol recorded this saying, "My God, Thiokol, when do you want us to launch? In April?" And another, he said, "I'm appalled. And eventually the Morton Thiokol executives relented and sort of accepted that launch schedule. Now, back to McDonald. He was at the launch to approve or disapprove the launch. And he cited three reasons for recommending a delay of the launch. One was the drop in temperature and the drop of temperature and how that affected the O-rings, and an overnight freeze that could have compromised the heat tiles necessary for re-entry, and also rough seas that threaten the recovery of the rocket boosters. So that's going up, coming down, and collecting. But he also knew that, or he says that signing the form was a decision that he had to make. If he signed off, he would risk the lives of those 7 astronauts on board. If he refused, he was putting his job at risk, his career, and a good life that he had put together for his wife and kids. Poor children. And they were enjoying it. He did not sign off. And, it was 72 seconds after launch. The Challenger exploded. 7 people lost their lives. 12 days after the Challenger explosion, McDonald was, as he said, sitting in the cheap seats in the back of a presidential inquiry, closed-door presidential inquiry, investigating the tragedy. And, from the back of the seat, he rose his hand and spoke in response to a statement made by NASA that Morton Thiokol had expressed some concerns but had approved the launch. And then McDonald sort of clarified what was going on, and that resulted in NASA looking bad and Morton Thiokol looking bad, and he got a demotion. But that demotion was then followed by a joint resolution of the House threatening future contracts with Morton Thiokol. And so the next result was that he was promoted to a vice president, put in charge of redesigning the booster rocket joints, and in 1988, the shuttle flights resumed. He retired after 42 years with Morton Thiokol, and that was in 2001. And in retirement, he became a fierce advocate of ethical decision making. He stressed his laws of the 7 R's, and it was always do the right thing for the right reason at the right time with the right people, and you will have no regrets for the rest of your life. He also framed regret in a paraphrase of journalist Sidney Howard. Regret for the things that we did is tempered by time, but regret for the things that we did not do is unconsolable. And that's absolutely true. And as I read this, got put on to a couple of other stories. Bob Ebling, who died at the age of 89. And he assumed so much of the blame and the responsibility and the guilt for, the space shuttle, explosion. He too was one of the engineers. And as he reflected, he said that was one of the mistakes God made. He shouldn't have picked me for that job. And the next time I talk to him, I'm going to ask him, why me? Why did you pick a loser? And as his story was told, he got letters and phone calls from engineers all over the place telling him it wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything. Y'all said it couldn't work. And in one of the letters that he got from another engineer, Jim Sides, he wrote, your efforts show that your care for people comes first for you. Your care for people comes first for you. God didn't pick a loser. He picked Bob Ebling. Bob Ebling did the right thing. That doesn't make him a loser. It makes him a winner. Bob Beaujolais, 6 months before the Challenger exploded, he predicted a catastrophe of the highest order involving loss of human life. 6 months, he told him what was going on ahead of time. After the explosion of the Challenger, he was ostracized, his health suffered, and they took it very hard. He had always been held in such high esteem, and it hurt so badly when people wouldn't listen to him. His health suffered mentally, physically. And then a therapist recommended speaking out even more. So for the next 3 decades almost, he traveled to engineering schools around the world, speaking about ethical decision making and sticking with the data. He told his wife, Roberta, this is what I was meant to do, to have an impact on young lives. He died quietly in his sleep 2 weeks after being diagnosed with cancer. And Roberta, his wife, reflected that he always stood by his work. He lived an honorable and ethical life, and he was at peace when he died. Commitment to what we value, to what we know to be true. There are so many things that ask us to kind of twist or close our eyes to or turn away from. A part of Lent, we talk about You know, giving up, confessing, turning away from those things that we've done wrong. But also a big part of being a person of faith is being committed to and sticking with what this gospel is about. God's grace, God's love, God's forgiveness, a commitment to life, seeing it as sacred, being true to ourselves, being true to God. And that's what I got for today. Be well. Talk to you next week.